Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 28 of the Beer Enthusiasts. And those balloons are on purpose. This is a brewery to be celebrated, a brewery that takes the kind of beer that they make very, very seriously, and one that we are extremely thankful to be trying. This is Notch Altbier, Dusseldorf style. They have a lot of words on their cans. Got a lot of stuff going on. So, Chris, do you want to walk us through the recipe or anything about the style, at least that we were able to figure
Yeah,
out?
absolutely. Uh, we were very lucky to get this from our friend Allo, who you can find on Instagram as Craft Beer Concierge. But also, quite luckily, Notch Brewing is shipping beer to a lot more states recently. So, if you're looking for mostly session strength beers that are true to style, hit up their website, see what you can get. They do a lot of things very traditionally. And there's this old quote in a Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine article about Bierstadt Lagerhaus about how they have like a terrifying commitment to authenticity or tradition. And I would file Notch right there as well. That's why we always want to get a hold of their stuff. And if you're looking for a brewery that's going to do things as traditionally as they possibly can, Notch Brewing is the one that's going to do that. So that's what we're thankful for because it's really, really difficult to find alt beer these days. And you can maybe find some things that are a little bit of a riff on alt beer, but it's tough. And so when you're talking about alt beer more generally, BJCP has these pegged at 4.3 to 5.5%. They've got them in kind of the amber bitter European beer category. SRM's 9 to 17, so you're squarely getting into amber and dark amber type territory. And the most interesting thing, especially if you get super old alt beer wherever you are, is that IBUs are 25 to 50. And while humans are pretty bad at detecting the difference between like five increments of IBU, 25 and 50 is quite different. It's literally double. So these beers can be quite bitter, but the ones that we get, the only one I've ever found from Germany in the United States is Eureka alt beer. And when I find it, it's old. It's no fault of theirs, but it's got to cross the Atlantic. It's got to get all the way over here. It's also in swing tops.
Yeah.
It's not in the best condition when we do get a hold of it. And so I don't think I've ever had moderately fresh traditional alt beer. So this is a very, very special experience for me. Notch Brewing, we already said frighteningly traditional, but even on the can, it's got the 4.5% ABV. It says single decoction and open fermented. So they're doing a lot of technique that's pretty old school. And I would imagine that alt beer, most traditionally speaking, involves decoction mash. BJCP says you can do step mashing, and depending on your grist and everything, you could tinker with whatever mash you want. But alt beer is kind of with Kolsch in that it's brewed a lot like a lager, but uses a top fermenting yeast. So it does go through a period of cold conditioning. Notch's philosophy is lagered forever, they say on a lot of their posts and stuff, which I absolutely love. But you're looking at base malts of German Pilsner and Munich, and then you can use a little bit of chocolate malt, a little bit of crystal, a little bit of maybe even dark wheat to adjust the color a little bit. I would imagine, like most traditionally speaking, that doesn't happen often. It's probably just a darker Munich or something like that. And then German hops, most traditionally spalt, but I would imagine you could approximate it with some other German hops as well. Yeah, so notches. Let's pour this sucker. What glassware did you bring? I brought a Stanga from Green Cheek, and that is roughly the appropriate glassware. The alt beer ones are a little stubbier, but still same shape. Yep, I see Scott's. Same glass. Pretty cool. And yeah, Scott, why don't you take
Yeah.
us through the beginning of
That'd be
Sensory?
great. Yeah. We've got obviously, ridiculously clear beer, kind of a slightly getting to right over kind of like an off-white color, but not quite getting into any sort of like tan territory, kind of like eggshell, small bubbles. It's kind of got this like light amber with still kind of like some bronze orange kind of hues to the color. So the appearance is beautiful. So aroma's pretty malt heavy. From what I can tell, I can smell kind of like that grape nut character that we sometimes get from pretty heavily like malted beers with Vienna malt. There's this really it's almost like it's verging on I mean, call it toasted bread crust, but this is like baked in the oven and has like an egg wash. Like this is like that gets that really
Hmm.
really brown kind of like glistening sheen of a brown of a Maillard browning character that you get from a kind of bread like that, almost something like challah bread or that kind of toast in the oven.
Yeah, I
There's
also
also a
get
little
the
bit of like a toasted almond character. There's a lot of nuttiness. So yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to go on a similar track as you with the nuttiness, but then also there's a little bit of a vaguely spicy hop aroma that starts to bend the bread character towards rye, toward pumpernickel. It's not the densest version of that, but you've got, a little bit heartier of a bread and toasted bread character.
Hmm. Yeah, and then once you move to the palate, there's a pretty good, there's a pretty prominent um, bitterness that's there, and I think that drives some of the impression of the spiced sort of hop character that you're getting. It gives it kind of again this is a little maybe not in that sort of pine or like kind of American realm, but maybe in more of kind of like more of like a dried grass, kind of kind of earthiness to it. There's a little bit of there's this really almost like Bischoff cookie, like a really kind of like dried cookie. It's one of those things that when you're talking about, um, how one thing can mean many different things. And biscuit as a descriptor is probably one of the worst offenders. Because there's flaky, southern, biscuits for biscuits and gravy, and then there's really dry, digestive English biscuits, and so those are basically basically the opposite of each other. But there's also this drying sensation that the bitterness is giving that I think is leading me to an impression of that kind of a cookie. Just something that's really got a lot more dryness to it. There's no creaminess to the beer. It's a pretty good balance between the malt and the hops, but the bitterness is there. There's a supportive malt character. It's got this impression that makes you want to think there's going to be like caramel, or you think there's going to be toffee, and you think it's going there, but it kind of is just going to the point of just like the most complex and darker like bread notes that you were mentioning. Like I think it just starts to get there, but you're just like, I just can't quite call that toffee, can't quite call that caramel without a lot of confidence at least. So
I agree, and it's almost like I was trying to think of a way to describe this note, which is I'm getting something reminiscent of um, sarsaparilla or like a botanical soda, but those are all so heavily sweetened that it's not really that, right? It is got some of those spicier and botanical influences, and then some of those darker characters of the malt that's almost like a malt syrup, but it's just not sweet enough to quite say this has root beer notes to it, but it's in that wheelhouse, but finishing dry.
yeah, that was wow. I'm really glad that you said that, because when I was like thinking like, wow, this is kind of leaning into like a cola realm, but I kind of thought the same thing as you, and so I didn't, well, I did one thing you're really not supposed to do when you're doing sensory like this, and I sort of filtered what I was saying, and I was starting to get worried about if I was really right or wrong about something, which is something you really want to try and avoid, and don't follow my example on that. But then as you were talking out and saying, well, this is kind of where it's leaning, then you kind of that helps me kind of reach this light bulb where it's really kind of this almost like a darker, um, just more of like an herbaceous tea almost. I think that's kind of where the
Yeah,
hop character is kind of helping this lean, because you're right, it is leaning into something that is when because what is sort of herbaceous like root beer but not really sweetened, and the dryness from the bitterness is almost mimicking the tannicness that you can get from maybe a slight oversteep of tea. So I think all of your little clues there that you were giving help lead me to that point.
yeah, wrapping that all up in black, yeah, black tea, like a unsweetened black tea
Yeah.
note is really clutch. I like that.
Mm, that's very yeah. And again, people are going to argue about this. I don't think it's ever going to be, maybe 50 years from now, there's, going to be somebody who decides to finally just put it to the test. But man, I just don't know if you can get as complex of a bread character like this if you don't decoct something like this. I just don't. That's just really hard for me
Right?
to I, so we just have to bring it up because I know we both think the same thing, and so it's helpful because I know it's not going to turn into an argument here and now. But gosh, I just think I don't know. I just think whatever they're doing, it's worth the time they're putting into it, because you're right. They are using a lot of complex, time consuming techniques, expensive techniques, both from, energy usage, because, you are essentially, boiling again for a longer period of time. When you add decoction, and then to open ferment, I mean, you need to have there's special rooms that you have to have built, and it's lots of safety equipment and cleanliness to the nines, and so there's a lot of high standards that need to be met to do that, and not have something horrible go wrong.
Yeah, you can mark both of us down as decoction believers. So we've got a mutual truce on that. But I'm with
That's
you.
right.
It's partly ingredients, and then process plays such a good role. I don't know if you can get this character without decoction, but that's the big mystery too, right? Is it just we're
Yeah.
such believers that we're willing to say that it adds an essence that you can't get otherwise, and it's actually there, and that's just the value of calling it as you see it, as you drink it. Don't be afraid to say, I think that that's contributing something special to the beer, and we'll just keep drinking beer and trying to figure it out.
Yep. That's all we can do. Um, let's move to food pairing, and we've said it before and we'll say it again. A lot of the stuff that's going on here is falling into this amber colored, good bit of hops, good bit of bitterness, good bit of malt, good bit of sweetness. um really kind of balance, kind of the American amber ale, California commons, strong bitters. These are kind of the realm that we really like to play with in terms of food pairing. So what did you come up with for savory?
Yeah, you're not lying. We love the beers kind of in the middle of this Venn diagram that have good balance and a little bit of a lot of different characters. And my very first thought, I have two savory thoughts. One is not particularly inventive, but it's Reuben sandwich. And I think, getting a good griddle on that kind of marbled rye bread. You've got your kraut to lend some brightness and acidity. You've got that pastrami that's almost like corned beef, right? It's got its own kind of marbled and spicy edge. And you can go the meaty route. Obviously, traditional Reuben's nothing um, to frown at. But I recently had one. I was on a trip to Berkeley, California, and I had one, a vegetarian approximation at a place called the Butcher's Son, and it was, you can build all that spice character. You've got that deep, dark toasted marbly rye and all the fixins, and I think that's going to be just home run city here. The thing that is this kind of secondary thing I thought of was I think this would be really good with grilled cheese and tomato soup. Get that tomato soup nice and basily, so you've got some herbaceous and spice character that's different than what is in the beer a little bit. But then you can be a little bit liberal with your cheeses, right? I think that you could do a really awesome one with like a sourdough, griddled sourdough, and like a Munster, that's just washed in a natto seed or it has that little bit of color, and otherwise is not like super pungent or anything. You could kick it up a notch if you wanted to do it with like Port Salut, which is creamy and gets you a
Mm.
little bit closer to that funky aged character. So
Hmm.
you could do the slightly cheaper knockoff version, or you could go Port Salut. But I think that ooey gooey, slightly funky cheese, griddled sourdough, and get out of here. I think this is going to be like super good with this. And the drinking experience of the beer matches up with both of those dishes too, because we were getting malt on the aroma with a little bit of hop, and it almost role reverses by the finish, right? You get waves of all this extremely complex malt character, but then in the middle, hop starts to take the wheel essentially, and it's building progressively to such a pleasant bitterness. I don't think
Hmm.
this is in the higher end of that IBU range. It's impossible to say, but and the beer is basically 5 weeks fresh, so it's still singing to me. But the waves of the drinking experience, the levels of it, I think would really comport to both of those dishes as well. What about you for savory?
I kind of was leaning in the same direction as you, kind of in kind of the tomato realm. One of the big struggles for me has always been, what beer is going to go really well with, red Italian sauces. For things like your lasagnas, for me, it's always just kind of been like beef bolognese is something I make on a, relatively often, or often enough that I've paired beers with it. And the best beer that I had found so far was Maibach. And it's one that I've been pretty excited to. But this is kind of like I'm surprised this doesn't often get paired to just kind of being like a darker Maibach. I'm not sure I've ever, I don't know if that's a
Mm-hmm.
BJCP thing or not, but it's really kind of in that, the IBU range is slightly has a little bit more potential for this, but the higher end of Maibach is 35. So you can certainly get up this could certainly be in that range. And you're still getting those kind of very tea like character, some slightly woody and earthy kind of characteristics. You're getting all those bread notes, you're getting all that bread character, so maybe leaning into beef bolognese, and rather than having a paler pilsner malt to match with the kind of noodle that you're using, this is just really going to be heavier on the meat, and matching with all of that caramelization that's happening. And then the basil, that's something that we were kind of both on the same page on. You're making sure you can get that, get that basil. If it's a little, even if it's a little garlicky, I think that can still play well with this. You can get maybe a little bit of like a, kind of like a complex like garlic bread thing kind of going on, with that. And I was also the same as you. I was kind of trying to research this a little bit because I wasn't actually sure what is, traditional with this, but and I don't know if it's in, Mark Dredge's book. It's called, um, it's pretty simple. It's just called Beer and Food Pairing and Matching. And one of his suggestions is a meal that I had never heard of, and it's called Hummel und Erd. So Hummel, and then Und, and then Erde, and it's like mashed potatoes, caramelized onions, um, like stewed apple. So it's just like an apple that's been cut in half and just stewed. So it's kind of like a lightly browned apple, and blood sausage. And
Mm.
that's definitely kind of especially the stewed apple part that plays, spoiler alert, but that definitely was something I had playing into dessert. I can totally see how the caramelized onion plays into all of this. I can certainly see how some of the more like herbaceous and earthy characteristics might brighten up something like blood sausage. I've had blood sausage before. Don't be silly, like it doesn't taste like blood. It's a little bit more gamey. It's a little bit, on the real savory side, and it is different, but it is not. It's don't take it too literally. So if this is a kind of meal, or even especially that part of the meal that you get to try, I would, highly suggest that. And if that, well, I don't know. If honestly, you might be living in a world where everything's at your fingertips. If you can just have blood sausage and alt beer whenever whenever you want. I don't know
Yeah.
where you live, but that's quite the place to be. What did you come up with for dessert?
Well, no surprise, we're going to be on a similar page, I would imagine, because you gave a little spoiler alert for yours. But I wanted to kind of start and end with apple strudel, and I just thought,
Oh my
um,
god, why am I going second? All right, well, you talk. I'm going to try and think of something else besides apple strudel because that's literally what I have written down.
yeah, and the motivation obviously is in one sense, this is like an ultra clean fermentation beer, right? If you as it's opening up a little bit, I can
Right.
kind of get some
Yeah.
whispers of ester character, but it's not a fruity beer by any means. And so we want to build in some fruity character that's not too heavy. And I mean, apples, I think, are just the way to go. Um, I want to stick some raisins into my apple strudel to kind of drag some of that sweetness toward some darker sugar character, and dried raisins. They'll kind of plump up as you bake the strudel, but that'll
Mm,
give us a little bit of like, hopefully maybe bending some of that malt character, which is going to match with kind of the buttery um, crust, but also drag it a little bit away from savory bread character toward um, you know, date, raisin, plum,
mm,
um, and fig type characters. And, you have all the bitterness in the world to help clean up without clashing too much with kind of a medium sweetness of apple strudel. And I also think that there's kind of an opportunity there to, this is not overtly like rosemary in the hop profile, but rosemary and apples is like a pretty classic combination
yeah.
too. And so just getting that sprig of something herbal in the strudel via the liquid of the beer, I think is a really fun way to do it. So, yeah, did you think of anything new yet, or you want to add something to the apple strudel?
Yeah, no, I think kind of in, I was just trying to think, okay, if I was maybe asked in like an oral exam to think of a different dessert or something that's kind of in the same realm, or, you know, I don't know, who knows what kind of weird stuff they could just say, oh, sorry, the customer's allergic to apples, you have to pick something else. Who knows what,
Yeah.
I don't know, who knows what Randy Mosher is gonna ask you. But the first thing that popped into my mind was pear tartan. Just having
Mm.
that sort of just just putting pears on the cast iron, having the crust ready to kind of just go over, just get them really nice and brown, super duper caramelized. I think adding, again, I was kind of hoping with the apple strudel thing that this would really kind of be leaning more into some sort of herbaceous hop character as opposed to something like kind of closer into like a more of a earthy tea kind of realm. Again, to kind of just get that brightening, or kind of just giving that idea almost of like getting apples straight from the orchard. There's like just the woods are around you, and you're kind of getting all of that kind of happening in your in your sensory experience. So yeah, adding something like that to pears, your none of the, obviously I'm looking up some of the recipes, and none of them say anything about adding any herbs. They're all pretty straightforward about just doing just pears in this caramel sauce with the flaky crust, which again I think is going to go great with the malt character. Anytime you can mimic just putting, we've been putting butter on bread for decades, and it's still just something that is incredible to do with toast, and it's simple, but it's so delicious. So yeah, that's what I came up with I thought you were going to be funny and like just whip through your explanation in like 10 seconds. All right, what do you got? What do you got? I'm done.
That would have been funny, but I
Oh
was too
man.
excited about the pairing too, which I think is, and Germany, most regions of
Yeah.
Germany, well regarded for their apple orchards too. So there are a lot of Apfel, Kuchen, and
Mm,
different apple like dessert preparations all over Germany. So I don't know what is like Dusseldorf
fun.
specific, but it makes sense why we gravitated toward palm fruit. And
Yeah.
that it just means we're on to something. We got to be creative sometimes, and
Yeah.
might be put on the spot to think of something completely out of the box, but um, there's a reason that both of us thought of that, and that hopefully means it's a good idea. So if you think it's a good idea or a terrible idea, or you've had a similar pairing, make sure to let us know in the comments. But we're always, some of these food pairings are completely theoretical. We have not test driven them. Other ones we've test driven and we really, really like. We have some long term goals of going back and taking a lot of these for a spin in one way or another. So, really, really would value any feedback that we get from people, whether it's direct message or commenting on the channel. That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, another fun episode again. Thank you, Olive, for such an amazing beer, one that we would never be able to experience without his generosity. Up next week, we have another one that we very lucky to be able to get our hands on, thanks to a good friend. Continuing with that theme, we're going to be tasting Pelican Kawanda Cream Ale, so a classic example of cream ale. Obviously, I mean, from what I've heard, if you're in Portland or anywhere around, you can just go to the grocery store and get this beer. Or if anybody else, we say this time and time again, we've done a lot of the more easy to get styles, and so we're running into a lot where it's like if someone is making a traditional version of insert cream ale, alt beer, whatever it is, support those people who are doing that, because they are doing great work and helping to keep these styles alive, or at least in the way that we think they're intended to be to be kept alive, which is the traditional way. Yeah, look for something in the cream ale realm for next time, and make sure to join us.
Cheers to that, friends. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, make sure to like the video. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. We are at the Beer Enthusiasts on Instagram. You can message us there if you have any questions, or again, any pairing suggestions, or if you have a beer maybe that you think we should, or a style that we should feature. Make sure to let us know. Chris is the fresh beer enthusiast. I am the vintage beer enthusiast. Cheers to Notch, and cheers to Altbier.